You know, we live in a world that is just, well, completely obsessed with the concept of instant. Like everything is about removing friction, removing wait
Oh,
times.
absolutely.
If I want a book, I click a button and it's on my device in, what, 3 seconds? If I want a
Hmm.
meal, it's at my door in 20 minutes? We have basically engineered the act of waiting out of our modern lives.
Right. And we generally consider that a triumph of civilization. It's pure efficiency. We expect reality to just sort of bend to our immediate demands.
We really do. But then you look at certain ancient processes and you realize they fundamentally cannot be hacked. They actively resist our modern obsession with efficiency. And that brings us to the core of what we are unpacking today, because we are
Fascinating.
looking exclusively at one single, deeply fascinating brand that operates as the absolute antithesis of the instant mindset, and that is Shinobu Whisky.
It's such a compelling topic
Yes.
because it's a brand that demands focus. You aren't just looking at a beverage here. You're looking at a philosophy translated into a physical liquid.
Completely. And to understand everything we're going to discuss today, from the specific geography to the wildly unique aging processes, we really have to start with the name itself.
Right? The name is everything.
Exactly. Shinobu, which translates to forbearance.
And that's not a word we throw around casually anymore, is it?
Yeah.
Forbearance. I mean, it means patience, endurance, and restraint under provocation.
Yeah.
In the Japanese context, it specifically symbolizes the spirit of a samurai. It's this profound idea that making something truly great takes time, and you simply cannot force it. You have to endure the wait.
So to you listening right now, keep that word forbearance in your mind as our compass for this deep dive, because you can't like yell at a barrel of whiskey to age
No,
faster.
you definitely cannot.
It just doesn't work. To really grasp the patience of the samurai and the patience required to make this specific spirit, we have to start with the land itself, because geography is destiny when it comes to whiskey.
Well, absolutely. It's the foundation of everything. And the Shinobu distillery is located in a very specific, revered part of Japan, the Niigata prefecture.
Niigata is fascinating. Like, it's situated right on the coast of the Japanese Sea, so you have these relentless, salty sea breezes sweeping in.
Right.
But more importantly, the defining characteristic of this region is the brutal, heavy snowfall during the winter months. I mean, it is not a gentle climate.
No, it's incredibly rugged. Honestly, it's harsh. But that specific, harsh winter climate is precisely what creates the magic. In fact, the cultural identity of Niigata actually revolves around a local legend. They call it the Three White
The
Treasures.
three white treasures, which are snow, white rice, and sick.
Exactly.
It sounds incredibly poetic, but it's actually rooted in hardcore environmental science.
It really is.
Because while the rice and the sake are crucial to the region's overall history for Shinobu whiskey, it all begins with that first treasure, the snow.
Right, because that massive winter snowpack in the mountains, well, it eventually melts. And as it melts, it undergoes this grueling, slow journey, filtering down through the earth, the rocks, the soil.
Decades of filtration sometimes.
Exactly. And what emerges from that natural filtration process is an abundance of incredibly soft, crystal clear water. This snowmelt is the absolute foundational element of the distillery.
Now, I want to unpack the science of this for a second, because in the whiskey world, you always hear distilleries bragging about their water source.
Oh, yeah. Every single one.
Right. It
Yeah.
almost sounds like a marketing gimmick, like, oh, our pristine mountain springs.
Right.
But why does the softness or hardness of the water actually matter at a chemical level when you're making whiskey?
It is everything.
Yeah.
I mean, literally everything. If we look at the biology of fermentation, yeast is a living organism, right?
Right.
When you introduce yeast to your grain mixture, it has to consume sugars and excrete alcohol and flavor compounds.
Yeah.
If you use hard water that is packed with heavy aggressive minerals like excess calcium, magnesium, or iron, those minerals actually increase the osmotic pressure on the yeast.
Okay, wait. Osmotic pressure.
Yeah, it basically means the minerals interfere with the chemical reactions happening inside the yeast cells.
So the yeast basically gets stressed out by the heavy minerals.
Exactly. It's like trying to run a marathon in a weighted vest.
Mm-hmm.
Stressed yeast produces off flavors, harsh alcohols, and these weird bitter notes. It masks the subtleties of the grain.
Oh, wow. I had no idea it was that sensitive.
Oh, highly sensitive. But when you use incredibly soft, pure water, like the snowmelt in Niigata, you are essentially giving the yeast a perfect, stress-free environment. You are starting with a blank, flawless canvas.
Right.
It allows the incredibly subtle flavors of the malt, the specific yeast strains, and eventually the oak cask to shine through completely unobstructed.
So it's almost like a Michelin star chef, right? Starting with the world's most flawless raw ingredients. If you have the ultimate water, you're already halfway to the ultimate whiskey.
That's a great analogy.
Yes.
See,
Forbearance built into the geology. The earth is patiently filtering the water over decades, preparing the perfect canvas. But having the perfect canvas doesn't make you an artist. You need someone who knows exactly how to manipulate those elements.
which brings us to the man who decided to harness that Niigata snowmelt in the first place, Kanusami.
Kanusami is such a fascinating figure to me because his background isn't really what you'd expect for the founder of a major whiskey distillery.
Not at all.
He didn't come from some long lineage of Scottish master blenders. He was actually an experienced brewer, the founder of the Niigata Beer Company.
And that is a crucial detail, not just like a fun biographical footnote.
Yeah.
Because Kanusami wasn't just making generic, mass-produced lager. He brought a massive technical innovation to his region. He was actually the first brewer in Niigata to apply secondary bottle fermentation and aging in beer.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener.
Yeah.
Because on the surface, making beer and distilling high-proof whiskey seem like two completely different universes.
They do seem miles apart, yeah.
Right. So why does a guy who pioneered a specific beer technique suddenly have this massive advantage when pivoting to hard liquor?
It really comes down to understanding what whiskey actually is in its infancy. I mean, before you ever heat up a copper still to extract the alcohol, you have to create a fermented grain liquid. You have to essentially make a beer.
The distiller's beer, right, the wash.
Exactly, the wash. If your fermentation process is flawed, weak, or unbalanced, your base liquid is ruined.
Yeah.
And no amount of fancy distillation or super expensive oak barrels will ever fix it.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Now, look at what Usami was doing with secondary bottle fermentation. Normally, commercial beer is fermented in a giant vat, pumped full of artificial carbon dioxide, and then bottled.
Right.
But secondary fermentation means you bottle the beer while there is still active living yeast and residual sugars inside the liquid. The fermentation actually continues inside the sealed glass bottle.
That sounds incredibly volatile. Like, isn't there pressure building up?
It is remarkably volatile. It requires an obsessive, savant-level control of microbiology. You have to perfectly calculate the residual sugar, the yeast vitality, and the exact temperature.
And if you miscalculate?
If you get it wrong, the yeast produces too much carbon dioxide, and the bottles literally explode from the pressure, just shatter.
Oh, wow. So he was dealing with literal tiny bombs if he messed up.
Exactly. But if you get it right, you develop a depth of flavor, natural carbonation, and ester profiles that are just incredibly complex.
So by the time Usami decided to make whiskey, he wasn't some novice learning how to handle yeast for the first time. He was already a master of the exact biological processes that form the absolute foundation of a great spirit.
He was. He understood temperature, time, and yeast behavior better than almost anyone in the region.
Exactly. So he had the pure Niigata snowmelt, and he had a peerless understanding of fermentation. He was armed with everything he needed. He just needed the legal permission to do it.
Which is notoriously difficult in Japan. The regulations are incredibly strict.
Right. But in 2017, Usami achieved a massive milestone. He obtained the first ever whiskey license for Niigata.
Yeah, that was a huge deal.
In the entire history of the prefecture, which is a region already world famous for its sake production, mind you, no one had ever been granted a license to distill whiskey until Kanusami.
It really highlights his sheer determination. I mean, navigating the bureaucratic hurdles of Japanese distillation regulations requires a totally different kind of forbearance.
Yeah.
He was pioneering a brand new industry in his own home.
So it's 2017, he has the license, he fires up the stills, utilizes his incredible fermentation skills, distills that pristine Niigata water, puts the spirit into a barrel, and then he hits a wall.
The inevitable wall.
Because whiskey, by legal definition and just by the laws of nature, requires years of waiting.
The waiting game. So how does a passionate innovator, someone who just fought tooth and nail to secure a historic license, sit on his hands for years while his life's work sleeps in a dark warehouse?
He doesn't. He figures out a way to share the journey with the public. Shinobu released what they call their newborn experiments.
Yes, the newborns.
There are two specific releases here that we found in the source material. The Shinobu Daimyo, which sits at 40% ABV and retails for around $79, and the Shinobu Newborn, which is a stronger 50% ABV expression, retailing at $179.
And what is remarkable about these releases is the absolute transparency of the brand. I mean, they are explicitly openly marketed as not being whiskey yet.
Right. The marketing literally says, let me quote this, "Let's be clear, this is not a whiskey, it's a newborn."
I have to ask, as someone who follows the industry, why do they legally have to say that?
It's the 3-year rule. To legally be classified and sold as Japanese whiskey, the spirit must be aged in wooden casks in Japan for a minimum of 3 years.
Oh, okay.
These newborn releases were pulled from the barrel and bottled after just over a year. So legally, they fall short of the definition. They are just aged grain spirit.
So put yourself in the shoes of the consumer for a second. You are standing in a liquor store looking at a 170 bottle of the newborn.
Which is not cheap. No, not at all. Why on earth would you pay premium prices for a bottle that the creator openly admits isn't legally whiskey yet? Like, what are you actually buying?
You are buying access. When you buy a newborn, you aren't buying a polished, finished masterpiece.
Yeah.
You are getting a sneak peek into the raw, unvarnished potential of the distillery. It's an educational experience for your palate.
I love that. It's like listening to the raw acoustic demo of a song before the fully produced, multi-layered studio album comes out. You get to hear the actual bones of the music.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
Okay.
Because the spirit hasn't spent 3 to 10 years hiding behind the heavy influence of the wood, you are tasting the raw skill of Ken Usami's distillation.
Right.
You are tasting those complex esters from his precise fermentation, because these are small batch, blended entirely by hand. And they're aged in a combination of first-fill bourbon barrels and Japanese Mizunara oak.
And just to clarify, first fill meaning the barrel has only ever held bourbon before it got to Japan, so it's still packed with intense vanilla and caramel compounds ready to leach into the spirit.
Right. It hasn't been exhausted yet. And the result of pulling it early is a clear, robust body that showcases incredible purity. The 50% ABV newborn specifically features sweet and nutty notes, a surrounding vanilla aroma from that first filled bourbon cask, and then a very distinct, slight incense of sandalwood.
Sandalwood. Now, that is a highly specific, evocative tasting note.
It really is.
It doesn't sound like a typical Scottish malt or an American bourbon. It sounds deeply intrinsically Japanese. So where on earth does a sandalwood note come from if it's not in the barley or the snowmelt?
That note is the signature of Shinobu. It isn't coming from the grain, and it isn't coming from the yeast. That sandalwood, that sort of temple incense aroma, is coming directly from the wood. Specifically, Japanese Mizunara oak.
Mizunara, okay, this is the skeleton key to the entire mature Shinobu lineup.
Absolutely.
If the Niigata water is the canvas, Mizunara oak is the signature brushstroke. Tell us about this wood, because it is legendary in the whiskey world.
It has a massive reputation. Mizunara, which scientifically is Quercus criscula, translates literally to water oak. And it is arguably the most difficult, stubborn, and challenging wood a cooper can possibly work with.
Why is it so difficult? I mean, wood is wood, right? You cut it down, bend the staves, make a barrel.
Not with Mizunara. First of all, the trees need to be around 200 years old before they're even large enough to be harvested for cask making.
200 years.
Yes, they grow incredibly slowly in the harsh Japanese climate. And secondly, they don't grow straight. They grow twisted and crooked, which makes cutting uniform, straight staves an absolute nightmare for the cooperage.
So it's super rare, and it's physically hard to shape.
But the biggest challenge is the moisture. I mean, it's called water oak for a reason. The wood is highly porous. It has a very high natural moisture content.
Okay.
So a standard Mizunara barrel is incredibly prone to leaking. You're putting precious, highly flammable, expensive liquid into a container that actively wants to leak it out onto the warehouse floor.
That sounds like an absolute liability for a business. I mean, why go through the headache? Why not just use American white oak, which is watertight and reliable?
Because of the biochemistry? When you endure the headache of Mizunara, when you apply that forbearance we keep talking about, the chemical payoff is unparalleled.
How so?
Mizunara oak contains exceptionally high levels of specific organic compounds called transogalactones, as well as high concentrations of vanillin. Over time, as the alcohol interacts with that highly porous wood, it extracts these compounds.
And those compounds taste like?
They present to the human palate as sandalwood, coconut, and a highly distinct aromatic Japanese temple incense. There is simply no other wood on earth that imparts that specific flavor profile.
Wow. And Shinobu utilizes this extensively. We see it introduced prominently in their single malts, like the Shinobu single malt first batch. This is a 43% ABV bottle retailing at $159, and it is incredibly rare. The pricing sheet noted only 3,000 bottles were produced worldwide. It uses those first fill bourbon barrels we talked about, but then it undergoes a finishing process in Mizunara to gain that exact sandalwood signature.
But here's the thing. They don't just reserve the Mizunara for their own distillate. And this leads us to one of the most fascinating and, frankly, debated practices in the Japanese whiskey industry.
Okay.
Let's look at their blended expressions.
Right. We have the Shinobu blended whiskey at $109 and the Shin blended whiskey at $99. Now, I want to play devil's advocate here for a second because I know there are whiskey purists listening.
Go for it.
Shinobu openly states that their blended whiskey uses carefully selected spirits sourced from all around the world. So they are bringing in global whiskeys, importing them to Niigata, maturing them in ex-sherry and ex-bourbon casks, and then finishing them in Japanese Mizunara oak.
Right. It's actually a very common practice in Japan, historically, due to shortages of aged domestic stock.
Okay, but hold on. If I'm paying premium prices for a Japanese whiskey and I find out the liquid was actually distilled in Scotland or America, I might feel a bit cheated, you know? Is this just a clever geographical loophole to slap a Japanese label on Scottish juice and upcharge for it?
That is the exact right question to ask. And trust me, it is a massive point of debate among enthusiasts. But if you look at how Shinobu approaches this, it's not a cheap trick. It is an incredibly demanding craft.
How so?
Because blending global whiskeys isn't just dumping leftover barrels into a giant vat and stirring it up. It is about finding harmony among vastly different, sometimes violently clashing flavor profiles.
I was actually trying to wrap my head around this concept earlier, and the analogy I keep coming back to is an elite boarding school.
Oh, I like that.
It's like taking exchange students from all over the globe, one from Scotland, one from America, Canada, wherever. They come into Niigata with these diverse, loud backgrounds. Like the American bourbon might be really sweet and brash, and the Scottish malt might be earthy and dense.
Right.
But then you put them through a rigorous, highly disciplined Japanese finishing school.
The finishing school being the Mizunara oak.
Exactly. The wood acts as the unifier. They graduate with a distinct, unified local character imparted by that final period in the Japanese cask.
The science of that finishing school is just remarkable. The Mizunara acts as a chemical bridge. It takes the heavy vanilla from the American bourbon casks and the dark, dried fruits from the European sherry casks, and it wraps them both in those exotic lactones, the coconut and the sandalwood.
So it forces them to play nice together.
Exactly. In the Shin blend, they maintain a strict 1-to-1 ratio of malt to grain. The extreme porosity of the Mizunara allows for a high level of micro-oxygenation. It literally breathes the harsh edges out of the disparate global whiskeys, oxidizing the rough alcohols and creating a unified, elegant, dynamic explosion on the palate.
It takes the world and makes it distinctly Japanese. I love that. But what happens when they apply that same rigorous patience to pure malt, to their own carefully curated expressions?
That brings us to their age statement, pure malts, where time becomes the dominant ingredient.
Tracking the pure malt progression is basically a masterclass in how Shinobu rewards patience over time. Let's walk the listener through the core range. It starts with the NAS.
NAS meaning non-age statement.
Right. Let's clarify that for anyone who might not be deep in the weeds of whiskey terminology, a non-age statement whiskey doesn't mean it's unaged. It just means the distillery has chosen not to print a specific number like 10 or 12 years on the bottle.
Yes.
Why would a distillery do that instead of just telling us how old it is?
Well, in the whiskey industry, if you put an age on a bottle, say 10 years, every single drop of liquid inside that bottle legally must be at least 10 years old.
Oh, I see.
You cannot blend in an amazing, vibrant 8-year-old cask to add some punch. A non-age statement gives the master blender total freedom. They can take older, deeply matured barrels and mix them with younger, punchier barrels to create a specific, consistent flavor profile without being handcuffed by a number on the label.
So for the Shinobu NAS Pure Malt, which, looking at the sheet, retails around $145, what is the master blender achieving with that freedom?
At the NES stage, the fresh wood barrel still dominates the expression. The flavor hasn't been entirely subdued by long-term oxidation yet. You get a touch of vanilla and a note they beautifully describe as flowers that bring the breath of nectar.
The breath of nectar, which points right back to that pristine snow melt we talked about at the beginning.
Exactly.
It's light, it's pure, it's exceptionally smooth, but that is really just the starting line. Because then Shinobu flexes their forbearance. They add time.
Yes, they do.
We step up to the 10-year-old, which jumps to $209. And then the absolute pinnacle of this specific line, the 15-year-old, retailing at $295.
Think about the biochemistry of what is happening inside a porous Mizunara barrel over 15 years in Niigata.
I mean, it's enduring 15 brutal, freezing, snowy winters and 15 hot, humid Japanese summers.
Exactly. And those seasonal temperature swings are crucial to the aging process. In the heat of the summer, the wood of the barrel expands. The pressure inside the cask actually rises, forcing the liquid deep into the cellular structure of the oak staves.
Pushing it right into the wood.
Right. And there, the alcohol dissolves the hemicellulose and lignin inside the wood, extracting complex sugars and vanillins.
And then winter hits.
Winter hits. The temperature plummets, the wood contracts, and it squeezes that flavor-rich liquid back out of the staves and into the main body of the whiskey. It acts as a literal slow-motion pump over 15 years.
Wow, a 15-year heartbeat.
That's a great way to put it. Furthermore, the extreme porosity of the Mizunara means a significant amount of the liquid evaporates over a decade and a half, what we call the angel's share.
So you have less liquid in the barrel, but what remains is incredibly concentrated.
Exactly. For the 15-year-old, this process brings out massive layers of flavor, resulting in a deep, floral, woody scent and a luscious, thick, sweet aftertaste. The sharp edges of the alcohol have been completely oxidized away over those 15 years.
But Ken Usami, being the innovator he is, wasn't content to just play with age and wood.
Oh, of course not.
He had to throw a massive curveball into the mix. He introduced peat.
Yes. The Shinobu Pure Malt Lightly Peated series. This is a major departure from the delicate, floral, sweet profiles we've been discussing so far.
They released a NAS peated at $150 and a 10-year-old peated at $212. Now, introducing peat into Japanese whiskey is always a delicate high-wire act.
Very delicate.
Because peat is essentially decaying, compressed vegetation found in bogs. Distillers harvest it, dry it out, and burn it to dry their malted barley, infusing the grain with thick, heavy, smoky phenolic compounds.
This is a very aggressive flavor.
Mm.
And the risk here is immense. I mean, if you have this pristine Niigata snowmelt and this delicate, rare Mizunara oak that imparts subtle sandalwood notes, why would you blast it with heavy bog smoke?
Right.
You risk completely overpowering the nuance of the water and the wood.
Exactly. It's like playing a beautiful acoustic guitar solo and then someone starts banging a gong in the background. How do they balance it? Because the background on the 10-year-old peated expression gives us a very specific, granular look at the aging sequence.
The secret is entirely in the sequencing and the timing. The process explicitly states that this liquid spends 9 years maturing in ex-bourbon and ex-sherry casks.
9 years. So it doesn't even touch the Japanese Mizunara wood for the vast majority of its life.
Right. For 9 years, the spirit is absorbing the rich caramel from the bourbon casks and the dark, syrupy dried fruits from the sherry casks. But more importantly, over those 9 years, the aggressive, sharp phenolic smoke from the peat has time to mellow.
It calms down.
It oxidizes and integrates into the sweetness of the wood. It stops being a harsh campfire smoke and becomes a rich, sweet, integrated earthiness.
And then only after it has achieved that balance, they move it.
Yes. It is followed by a final transformative year in prized Mizunara oak.
One final year, just enough time for the Japanese finishing school to do its work.
That single year is enough to impart those delicate trans-oak lactones, the sandalwood and incense over the top of the mellowed smoke, and the sweet sherry.
That makes perfect sense.
If they put the peated spirit straight into Mizunara for 10 years, the wood influence and the smoke might clash or become overly bitter. By sequencing it this way, they create a masterclass in timing.
It's like a symphony where the Mizunara is just the final lingering crescendo right before the music stops.
It's beautiful. But Shinobu doesn't stop at crafting the liquid to represent this level of care. They physically wrap the bottles in the same philosophy.
This is where the visual identity of the brand really leaps to the forefront. We have to talk about the Shogun line.
Oh, these bottles.
These bottles are striking. You have the pure malt black Shogun at $299 and the blended red Shogun at $279. This is not just a standard glass bottle with a nice paper label glued to the front.
Not at all. The design is a full 360-degree wraparound visual narrative. It is inspired directly by the armor of a Japanese general from the late Sengoku period.
The Sengoku period, the age of warring states. This is the 15th to 17th century in Japan, characterized by near-constant civil war, political intrigue, and the absolute height of samurai culture.
Yes.
It's an intense era to draw inspiration from.
It is, and the design reflects that intensity beautifully. You have a juxtaposition of minimalist body lines combined with highly intricate knot imagery.
The knots on the armor, I found this detail fascinating in the source material. Why focus on the knots?
Well, in traditional samurai armor, the intricate silk lacing and knots were functional, first and foremost. They held the iron and leather plates together, allowing for flexibility in combat.
Right.
But they were also deeply symbolic. The tight, unyielding nature of the knots represented the steadfastness, the unbreakable loyalty, and the endurance of the warrior wearing it.
Endurance. Forbearance.
Yeah.
It brings us right back to the name Shinobu. The bottle itself is a physical, visual manifestation of the patience and strength required to make the liquid inside.
But the story of Shinobu isn't just about looking backward at historical shoguns or even Ken Usami's founding achievements. There is a deeply personal bottle in this portfolio that looks squarely at the future of the distillery. The Shinobu Single Malt Kihei.
The Kihei, this is a heavyweight bottle. It sits at a robust 46% ABV, which is higher than the standard 40 or 43 we've been seeing.
Which gives it a much more oily, viscous mouthfeel.
Exactly. And it carries a retail price of $349, making it one of the highest price points we've discussed today.
What makes the Kihei warrant that prestige?
What makes it special is the authorship. This bottle was not crafted by the founder, Ken Usami. It was crafted by the second-generation master distiller, Usami Tatsuya.
The torch has officially been passed.
Yes, and Tatsuya used this liquid as a complex tribute to the foundation his predecessor built. It is aged in a highly specific combination of bourbon, sherry, and hogshead casks.
Let's pause on that term for a second. Hogshead casks. We've talked about bourbon and sherry barrels, but what exactly is a hogshead, and why does a master distiller specifically choose to use one? It really comes down to the surface area to volume ratio. A standard American bourbon barrel holds about 200 liters. A European sherry butt is massive, holding about 500 liters. A hogshead sits right in the middle, typically holding about 250 liters.
And how do they make them? Are they a specific type of tree?
Usually coopers take the staves from older bourbon barrels, break them down, and reconstruct them with new ends or additional staves to create a slightly larger cask.
Oh, clever.
Because it holds 250 liters, the ratio of liquid interacting with the wood is different than in a standard barrel. It allows for a slightly slower, more measured oxidation and maturation process. It's perfect for long-term aging, where you don't want the wood to aggressively overpower the spirit too quickly.
So Tatsuya uses this carefully calibrated mix of casks to yield rich layers of dried fruit, spice, and subtle oak. But it's the lore, the philosophy behind the name Kihei that really struck me.
It is profoundly philosophical. The tribute defines Kihei's legacy with a very specific dichotomy. It praises unwavering resilience and bold leadership, but it defines it as possessing both a monk's devotion and a warrior's strength.
A monk's devotion and a warrior's strength. I love that phrasing. It perfectly encapsulates everything we've talked about.
It really does.
The monk who sits in silent meditation for years, completely unbothered by the passage of time that is the forbearance of watching the barrel age, trusting the slow chemistry of the Mizunara.
Exactly.
And then the warrior who strikes with decisive, bold action that is the innovator securing the first license in Niigata, breaking the rules to release the newborn, or heavily peating a pure malt.
It captures the entire ethos of the distillery in one sentence. It's a beautiful synthesis of the brand's identity, crafted by the son to honor the legacy he inherited.
And speaking of a warrior's bold action, before we leave the premium bottles, we really have to touch on a collaboration that proves they aren't afraid to get weird. The Shinobu Whisky.
This is a fascinating outlier in the portfolio. It's crafted by someone named Toji, who is identified as the chief executive of the Igashima Sake Brewery.
A sake master crossing over to blend whiskey. That alone is intriguing.
But it's the casks he uses that make it revolutionary. The Shinobu uniquely incorporates Japanese shochu barrels alongside the traditional sherry and bourbon.
Shochu. For those who might not know, shochu is a traditional Japanese distilled liquor.
Right.
But unlike whiskey, which is made from malted grains and yeast, shochu is often made from sweet potatoes, rice, or barley. And it utilizes koji, a specific kind of mold for saccharification before fermentation.
Exactly. The biochemistry of shochu is entirely different from whiskey. Koji produces incredibly savory, earthy, umami-rich flavor compounds.
So using an ex-shochu barrel for whiskey maturation, I can't even fathom the kind of deep, earthy, complex umami notes that would bring to a traditional whiskey profile.
It's wild.
It just proves that while Shinobu deeply reveres tradition and patience, they're absolutely unafraid to experiment.
Innovation driven by tradition.
Okay, so we've spent the last chunk of time exploring the absolute stratosphere of the whiskey world.
We really have.
We're talking about $350 single malts crafted by second-generation distillers. Liquids resting for 15 years in rare, leaky water oak. Bottles wrapped in intricate, symbolic Sengoku samurai armor. This is high luxury. This is exclusivity.
It is the realm of the serious collector, the dedicated aficionado the person who has a dedicated whiskey cabinet and a specific Glencairn glass for tasting.
But if we look back at the samurai ethos, a true samurai doesn't just sit in a fortified castle wearing gold-laced armor. A true samurai serves the people.
Right.
And that brings us to our final stop today. Shinobu's most accessible and arguably most commercially brilliant format.
We are shifting gears drastically here. From the heights of premium single malts to the ready-to-drink, or RTD, aluminum can market.
They introduced two products in this category that we're looking at. The Shinobu Highball, which is a 380 milliliter can sitting at a very sessionable 7% ABV, and the Shinobu Cola, also 380 milliliters, slightly stronger at 8% ABV.
Now, from a brand perspective, this is a massive risk.
Huge risk.
Why would a prestige distillery that prides itself on $300 bottles of Mizunara-finished 15-year-old pure malt risk cheapening their brand by putting their samurai logo on a canned cola drink in a convenience store?
To answer that, you really just have to look at the pricing dynamics. The contrast is almost dizzying. We just talked about a $349 bottle of Kihei.
Yeah.
If you look at the Highball, you can buy a single can for $11.
Right.
Or if you want to stock up, a 24-pack is $202. The Cola is $13 for a single can, and a 24-pack is $118.
It completely flips the demographic. You are taking the core Shinobu flavor profile, the essence of that Niigata water in distillation, and making it available to a vastly different consumer base than the premium buyers.
It is a brilliant business strategy. Think about the history we uncovered earlier. How did Ken Usami get his start?
With the beer.
Right. He wasn't born in a pristine whiskey rickhouse surrounded by master blenders. He founded the Niigata Beer Company. He is a master of brewing, of secondary fermentation, of packaging and distributing carbonated beverages to the masses.
He is returning to his foundational roots to fund and build his future.
Exactly. He is utilizing that deep historical expertise in brewing and carbonation to introduce the Shinobu brand to everyday consumers who might be completely intimidated by a $300 bottle of pure malt.
Oh, absolutely.
You grab an $11 highball at the end of a long Tuesday, you crack it open, you taste the quality, you see the samurai logo, and a psychological seed is planted.
It's brand building through absolute accessibility. It democratizes the forbearance. You don't have to wait 15 years to taste the spirit of Niigata. You can experience a fraction of it today in that can.
And it builds loyalty.
It does. But the can points you toward the 15-year wait, because 5 years down the line, when that consumer gets a major promotion or they're celebrating a milestone anniversary, what premium bottle are they going to reach for on the top shelf?
The one whose logo they already know, respect, and trust. It's the perfect entry point. From the pristine snow melt filtering through the mountains all the way to an aluminum can in a cooler, it's a complete holistic ecosystem.
It really is a masterclass in brand architecture.
Okay, let's step back and look at the massive journey we've taken today through the world of Shinobu. We started on the rugged, sea-swept coast of Niigata, diving deep into the hydrology of how the three white pressures, specifically the heavy winter snowpack, strip the heavy minerals from the water, creating a low osmotic pressure canvas for the yeast to thrive.
We followed Ken Usami's transition from a savant of secondary beer fermentation to navigating the intense bureaucracy of Japan just to secure that historic first-ever whiskey license in 2017.
We analyzed the absolute audacity of the newborn releases, selling the raw acoustic demo of the spirit and introducing that signature sandalwood note while adhering strictly to the 3-year Japanese regulations.
Right.
We explored the maddening cooperage and complex biochemistry of the Mizunara oak, acting as a rigorous Japanese finishing school for diverse global blends, and elevating their pure malts through a 15-year cycle of seasonal oxidation.
We examined the calculated risk of the peated pivot, perfectly sequencing the harsh phenolic smoke through a 9-year bourbon and sherry slumber before a final 1-year Mizunara integration.
Such a cool process.
We unpacked the visual storytelling of the Sengoku samurai armor and the deeply personal monk and warrior legacy of the second generation's Kihei bottle.
And finally, we saw how a visionary founder used his carbonation roots to package all of that prestige into an $11 aluminum can, welcoming the everyday drinker into the samurai ethos.
It is a remarkable portfolio. But before we sign off, if we connect everything we've discussed today to the bigger picture of the spirits world, this distillery's methods raise a profound, almost existential question about the very nature of whiskey itself.
Oh, I like where this is going.
I want you to think about the blending practice we debated earlier. The Shinobu blended whiskey uses spirits legally sourced from all around the world, Scotland, America, wherever they find quality.
We exchange students.
Exactly. They bring those diverse spirits to Niigata, and they subject them to a local climate, the local water, and the final transformative maturation in Japanese Mizunara oak. So here is the provocative thought for you to mull over. In the deeply traditional, often rigidly geographical world of whiskey, a world obsessed with terroir and origin, where exactly does the soul of the spirit truly reside?
Wow, that is a heavy question.
Is the soul fundamentally born in the soil where the grain was originally grown, mashed, fermented, and first distilled? Or does the spirit's true identity, its final soul, only emerge through the forbearance of its final maturation? Does it become truly, authentically Japanese only when it breathes the snowy winds of the Japanese sea through the pores of a Mizunara cask?
That is the ultimate question of nature versus nurture applied to a glass of whiskey. Does the birth define the spirit, or does the finishing school?
I will leave that for you to decide the next time you pour a dram.
What a perfect place to leave it. The tension between the instant world we live in and the patient breathing barrel. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the resilient, complex, and patient world of Shinobu whiskey. We'll catch you on the next one.